On October 30, 2024, in the affluent coastal community of Del Mar Heights in San Diego, California, 12-year-old Jessica Hermar murdered her two younger sisters, 9-year-old Nicole and 10-year-old Leslie, using her father's hunting rifle in a densely wooded ravine less than half a mile from their home. The girls had left their home that afternoon, with Jessica telling their mother they were going to build a secret fort in Torrey Pines Extension Reserve, a small nature preserve that bordered their neighborhood. What their parents couldn't have known was that Jessica had carefully planned this outing, having researched how to operate her father's rifle and deliberately selecting a location where the dense California coastal trees would muffle the sound of gunshots. If you're watching this video, please hit the subscribe button to follow more true crime stories like this one. We'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments below. Jessica had been meticulous in her preparation, stealing the key to her father's gun safe 3 days earlier and practicing opening it when her parents were out. The morning of the murders, while her mother was on a conference call and her father was at work, she removed the Remington bolt-action rifle from the safe, loaded it according to instructions she had searched for online, and concealed it in her father's large canvas duffel bag. She selected ammunition that would be lethal but not overly powerful, demonstrating an understanding of firearms that was chilling for someone her age. Jessica's preparation extended beyond just taking the weapon, as she had researched the park's layout online and identified a small clearing over 100 yards off the main trail where they would be unlikely to be seen or heard by other visitors. The day was typical for Southern California in late October, mild, sunny, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of eucalyptus and sage through the park's winding trails. Jessica led her unsuspecting sisters through the familiar pathways they had explored many times before, but today they ventured deeper into the ravine than they had ever gone. Nicole and Leslie were excited about building their secret fort, carrying small shovels and decorations in their own backpacks, unaware that their sister was guiding them to a predetermined location for murder. As they reached the clearing Jessica had selected, she suggested they put down their backpacks and look for branches to build their fort, ensuring her sisters' backs were turned as she unzipped the duffel bag and removed the rifle. According to the forensic reconstruction of events, Jessica first shot Leslie in the back of the head at close range, killing her instantly as she was gathering sticks about 15 feet away. Nicole, hearing the gunshot, turned toward her sister in confusion and fear, only to be shot in the chest as she began to run. The second shot didn't kill Nicole immediately, and evidence suggests Jessica approached her wounded sister, who was attempting to crawl away, and fired a final shot to her head. Park visitors reported hearing what they thought were 3 firecrackers or car backfires around 4:15 p.m., but due to the ravine's acoustics and the thick tree coverage, they couldn't pinpoint the location or recognize the sounds as gunshots. After ensuring both her sisters were dead, Jessica placed the rifle back in the duffel bag, covered the bodies with branches and leaves in a cursory attempt to hide them, and walked home alone. When Jessica returned home around 5:30 p.m., she told her mother that her sisters had wanted to stay at the park longer, and she had gotten bored and left them playing. Her demeanor was described by her mother as unusually calm, though Sarah Hermar didn't immediately register this as suspicious. As the evening progressed and her sisters didn't return home, Jessica participated in the initial search efforts, even suggesting places in the park to look, deliberately directing family and neighbors away from the actual location of the bodies. By nightfall, with Nicole and Leslie still missing, Michael and Sarah Hermar called the police, initiating a search that would continue through the night and into the next morning, with Jessica maintaining her story that she had simply left her sisters playing in the park. The discovery came at 7:38 a.m. on October 31st, when Margaret Chen, a regular morning jogger, veered off the main trail to investigate what she initially thought was discarded clothing, and discovered the partially covered bodies of the two girls. The 911 call she made was played later at trial, her voice shaking, as she told the dispatcher, "I found them, oh God. I found two little girls and they're not moving." San Diego Police Department officers secured the scene immediately, and detectives quickly identified the victims as the missing Hermar sisters. The murder weapon was discovered approximately 50 yards from the bodies, hastily concealed in the canvas duffel bag and covered with fallen leaves, a critical mistake that would later link Jessica directly to the crime. Detective Noah Anderson, a 15-year veteran of the San Diego Police Department's homicide unit, arrived at the scene by 8:20 a.m. and immediately noted several concerning details. The position of the bodies and the precision of the head wounds suggested the shooter had been comfortable with the victims, getting close enough for accurate shots without causing alarm. The presence of the duffel bag, later identified as belonging to Michael Hermar, raised immediate questions about how the girls had accessed the rifle, which their father kept in a locked gun safe. Most disturbing to Anderson was the attempted concealment of the bodies, not thorough enough to prevent discovery, but deliberate enough to suggest the killer wanted to delay it, pointing to a perpetrator who understood the implications of their actions. As the crime scene, investigators processed the ravine clearing. The Hermar family was notified of the devastating discovery, their grief quickly turning to confusion when detectives mentioned the rifle. Michael Hermar, overcome with emotion, rushed to check his gun safe, finding it locked but empty, the rifle missing, but no signs of forced entry. This revelation turned the investigation in an unexpected direction, as detectives realized that whoever took the rifle had either known the combination to the safe or had access to the key. Jessica, who had been sitting quietly on the living room sofa while her parents received the news, showed minimal emotional reaction, a detail that several officers present would later testify seemed unusual, even allowing for shock. The San Diego Medical Examiner's Office determined that both girls had died between 4 and 4:30 p.m. the previous day, consistent with the reported sounds heard by park visitors. Leslie had died instantly from a single gunshot wound to the occipital lobe, while Nicole had suffered a non-fatal chest wound before receiving a fatal shot to the temple, suggesting she had attempted to flee or had witnessed her sister's murder before being shot herself. Ballistics confirmed that both girls had been killed by bullets from the same rifle found at the scene, a Remington 700 registered to Michael Hermar, which he used occasionally for hunting trips in the mountains east of San Diego. The precision of the shot suggested someone with steady hands who was either familiar with the weapon or had studied its operation. Jessica's initial statements to police maintained her innocence, claiming she had left her sisters building a fort and gone home alone. But her story began to show inconsistencies when detectives asked for specific details. She couldn't explain why she had separated from her sisters when they had been excited about a project they were working on together, nor could she account for the significant time gap between when she claimed to have left them and when she arrived home. Most tellingly, Jessica described the location where she had left her sisters as being just a little way off the main trail. Yet the bodies were found in a clearing that required navigating several unmarked paths to reach, a discrepancy that suggested she either knew exactly where her sisters had died or had led them there herself. Nicole and Leslie Hermar were bright, vibrant children whose lives were intertwined not just by blood, but by a genuine friendship that many siblings never achieve. 9-year-old Nicole, a fourth grader at Del Mar Heights Elementary, was known for her artistic ability and compassionate nature, often spending weekends volunteering with her mother at the local animal shelter, where she would draw portraits of dogs awaiting adoption to help them find homes. Her teachers described her as intellectually curious and emotionally intuitive, noting that she often mediated conflicts among her classmates with a wisdom beyond her years. Nicole's bedroom walls were covered with her artwork: watercolor landscapes of the San Diego coastline, portraits of her family members, and detailed drawings of the animals she hoped to help as a veterinarian, the career she had already set her heart on. 10-year-old Leslie, in 5th grade at the same school, was the athlete of the family, excelling in soccer and swimming, with a natural grace that led her dance instructor to suggest she had potential for serious ballet training. With her quick wit and outgoing personality, Leslie made friends easily and was often the center of a boisterous group of children at neighborhood gatherings, organizing games and adventures for everyone to enjoy. She kept a journal found in her room after her death that revealed a thoughtful young girl who wrote poetry about the ocean and made lists of goals that ranged from make the competitive swim team to help people who don't have enough food. Both girls shared a love of reading, maintaining a joint book nook in their room with shelves of adventures they'd read together, taking turns voicing different characters. The sisters' close relationship was evident in family photos that lined the Hermar home. Nicole and Leslie building sandcastles at Torrey Pine State Beach, huddled together over a tide pool examining sea creatures, or dressed in matching outfits for holiday portraits, their arms wrapped around each other with genuine affection. Friends of the family remarked that the girls were rarely seen apart, sharing not just activities but confidences, with Leslie acting as a protective older sister while benefiting from Nicole's emotional insights. Their bond extended to a private language of inside jokes and code words that their parents sometimes couldn't decipher, a sisterly shorthand, developed over years of shared experiences and mutual trust that made them not just siblings, but best friends. Sarah and Michael Hermar had encouraged this close relationship, creating family traditions that celebrated their daughter's individuality while fostering their connection to each other. Every Sunday evening was Sister Showcase Night, where Nicole would display artwork she had created during the week, and Leslie would perform a dance routine or read a poem she had written, with their parents offering specific, thoughtful praise for each girl's unique talents. The Hermars believed in recognizing each child's distinct personality rather than treating them as a unit, a parenting approach that made the sisters secure enough in their parents' love to support rather than compete with each other. This philosophy was evident in how they had designed the girls' shared bedroom, divided into clearly personalized spaces that reflected their different interests, but with a common area in the center where they could come together. The absence of Jessica from most family photographs and activities now seemed, in retrospect, like a warning sign that had been missed amid the busy routine of daily life. Where Nicole and Leslie moved through the world together, Jessica increasingly orbited at a distance, declining invitations to family beach outings or retreating to her room during game nights. School counselors would later reveal that Jessica had begun refusing to participate in family therapy sessions recommended after she had shown signs of aggression toward her sisters, telling the counselor, "They talk about their feelings too much. It's stupid." The contrast between the vibrant, connected lives of Nicole and Leslie and the isolated path Jessica had chosen made their deaths all the more tragic. Two children who embodied joy and potential, whose futures were erased by the sister who couldn't bear to see them shine. In the days following the murders, the Del Mar Heights community gathered for a candlelight vigil at the elementary school playground, where Nicole and Leslie had spent countless recess periods laughing and playing. More than 300 people attended, including classmates, teachers, neighbors, and even strangers, moved by the tragedy, creating a sea of flickering lights against the darkening California sky as the sun set over the Pacific. Children placed handmade cards and artwork on a memorial table alongside photos of the sisters, while adults who had known them shared stories that painted a picture of two extraordinary young lives. Mrs. Reynolds, Nicole's art teacher, displayed a watercolor painting Nicole had completed just days before her death. A sunset over the ocean, with two boats sailing side by side toward the horizon, a work that now seemed hauntingly prescient. The loss of Nicole and Leslie created ripples that extended far beyond their immediate family, affecting everyone who had known their kindness and witnessed their joy. Their soccer coach, David Mercer, established a scholarship in Leslie's name for young athletes who demonstrated exceptional sportsmanship, saying through tears at the memorial, "Leslie understood that how you play matters more than if you win." The animal shelter where Nicole had volunteered created a special adoption program called Nicole's Angels, featuring her artwork on their materials and continuing her mission of finding homes for overlooked pets. The impact of their brief lives was measured not just in personal achievements, but in how they had touched others. The classmate who spoke of how Nicole had sat with her every day when she was new to the school, the elderly neighbor who described how Leslie had organized a team of kids to help clear her yard after a storm. At their funeral, held at St. James Catholic Church in Solana Beach, the white casket seemed impossibly small against the backdrop of stained glass and solemn architecture. Michael Hermar, supported by family members as he struggled to maintain his composure, spoke of his daughter's different personalities but shared capacity for joy. Nicole noticed everything: the changing colors in a sunset, the feelings someone was trying to hide, the perfect detail that made her artwork come alive. Leslie lived at full speed, throwing herself into every experience with a fearlessness that made us proud and terrified at the same time. Sarah Hermar, too grief-stricken to speak at length, simply shared a recent memory of finding the girls asleep in Nicole's bed, books scattered around them, their hands still clasped after reading together late into the night, saying, "That's how I'll always remember them, connected, peaceful, exactly where they wanted to be." What made the loss of Nicole and Leslie even more incomprehensible was the ordinary beauty of the lives they had been living, lives filled with homework and dance recitals, arguments over whose turn it was to feed the family cat, and secret wishes written in diaries. They had been planning their Halloween costumes. Nicole was going to be a famous artist, complete with a beret and paintbrush, while Leslie had chosen to dress as an Olympic swimmer with a medal she had crafted from gold paper. The backpacks found at the crime scene contained these partially completed costumes, along with the materials they had brought to build their fort: colored string to mark the boundaries, small solar-powered garden lights to illuminate the space, and a waterproof container holding a secret sister's notebook where they recorded ideas and plans. The mundane treasures of childhood stood in stark contrast to the violence that had ended their lives, making their absence from the world all the more profound. The psychological impact on the children who had known Nicole and Leslie was immediately apparent and deeply concerning to parents and school officials. Nightmares, anxiety about playing outdoors, and fear of separation from parents became common among their classmates and friends, prompting the school district to bring in child psychologists to help students process their grief and fear. One child psychologist who worked with the students noted that the fact that the killer was another child, and worse, the victim's own sister, had shattered their sense of safety in a way that was particularly difficult to address. Children understand monsters in movies or bad guys on TV, but they struggle to comprehend how someone their own age, someone who was supposed to love her sisters, could do something so terrible, explained Dr. Marcia Levine, who counseled many of the students at Delmar Heights Elementary in the months following the murders. The lives of Nicole and Leslie Hermar would eventually be reduced to court exhibits and testimony, their personalities dissected for clues about why their sister had wanted them dead, but those who had known them fought to preserve the fullness of who they had been. Their teachers compiled books of their schoolwork, Nicole's stories and artwork, Leslie's science projects and journal entries, creating archives of 2 interrupted childhoods that showed not just what had been lost, but what might have been. Friends shared memories on a website created by a neighbor, building a digital monument to 2 girls who had embodied the best of childhood: curiosity, kindness, and the capacity for uncomplicated joy. In a community stunned by violence, remembering Nicole and Leslie as they lived rather than how they died became an act of resistance against the darkness that had claimed them. The investigation into the murders of Nicole and Leslie Hermar began at 9:17 p.m. on October 30th, 2024, when Sarah Hermar made a frantic call to the San Diego Police Department, reporting that her 2 youngest daughters had not returned from playing in the park near their home. The 911 dispatcher's recording captured Sarah's escalating panic as she explained that the girls had left home around 3:30 p.m. with their older sister Jessica, who had returned alone, claiming the younger girls had wanted to stay and play. "We've searched everywhere," Sarah told the dispatcher, her voice breaking. "It's dark now, and they know they're supposed to be home before dark." The dispatcher, recognizing the seriousness of the situation involving 2 missing children as night fell, immediately escalated the call to priority status, dispatching patrol officers to the Hermar home and initiating a search of Torrey Pines Extension Reserve. Officers arrived at the Spanish-style home on Mercado Drive at 9:32 p.m., finding Michael and Sarah Hermar preparing to return to the park with flashlights after an initial search had yielded no sign of their daughters. Officer Elena Rodriguez, first on the scene, noted in her report that while the parents appeared genuinely distraught, 12-year-old Jessica seemed detached from the crisis, sitting on the living room sofa, texting on her phone. When Rodriguez asked Jessica directly about when she had last seen her sisters, the girl responded without looking up from her phone. "They were being annoying, so I left them playing by some trees." This casual dismissal of her missing sisters struck Rodriguez as unusual, prompting her to make a note in her preliminary report about Jessica's concerning affect that would later become significant to the investigation. As midnight approached with no sign of Nicole and Leslie, the San Diego Police Department expanded the search, bringing in K-9 units and asking residents of the neighboring communities to check their yards and outbuildings. Michael Hermar led one search team through the park's main trails, while Sarah remained home in case the girls returned on their own. Jessica claimed fatigue and went to bed around 11:30 p.m., a decision that seemed incomprehensible to her parents given the circumstances, but which they attributed to shock. The search continued through the night, with volunteers from the community joining police officers to comb through the dense chaparral and eucalyptus groves that characterized the Iber Reserve, calling the girls' names and searching with powerful flashlights that sent beams dancing through the darkness of the coastal forest. Dawn broke over San Diego County with still no sign of the missing sisters, and the police department officially classified the case as a critical missing persons investigation, allocating additional resources and notifying regional law enforcement agencies. Jessica, appearing rested despite the crisis unfolding around her, was asked by Detective Noah Anderson to guide a search team to the exact location where she had last seen her sisters. The girl led officers along a main trail before pointing vaguely toward a densely wooded area, saying, "Somewhere over there, I think." When pressed for more specific information, Jessica became visibly annoyed, telling Anderson, "I already told you. I left because they were being babies about building the fort." Her apparent lack of concern continued to disturb the officers involved, with one noting in his report that Jessica seemed more inconvenienced than worried about her missing sisters. The breakthrough in the search came not from Jessica's directions, but from Margaret Chen, a software engineer who regularly jogged through the reserve before work. Veering slightly off her usual path to avoid a section of trail muddied by recent landscape irrigation, Chen spotted what appeared to be clothing partially covered by branches and fallen leaves in a small clearing. Drawing closer, she realized with horror that she was looking at the bodies of two young girls, positioned side by side with their hands nearly touching, as if even in death they sought connection with each other. Chen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone, called 911 at 7:38 a.m., staying on the line with the dispatcher until the first patrol officers arrived at the scene 6 minutes later, securing the area and beginning the process that would transform a missing persons case into a homicide investigation. The crime scene in the wooded ravine told a story of calculated violence that shocked even veteran homicide detectives. The position of the bodies and the wound patterns indicated that Leslie had been shot first, from behind, suggesting she had been unaware of the danger until the moment the bullet struck her. Nicole's wounds, one to the chest and one to the head, along with the blood trail leading from her initial position, painted a horrific picture of a child who had witnessed her sister's murder, attempted to flee, and been pursued by her killer. Detective Anderson, examining the scene with growing dread, noted the precision of the head wounds, unusual in cases involving untrained shooters, and the deliberate but incomplete attempt to hide the bodies. Whoever did this wanted the bodies to be found eventually, he noted in his report, but they needed enough time to establish distance from the crime. The discovery of Michael Hermar's canvas duffel bag, partially concealed under fallen leaves approximately 50 yards from the bodies, provided the first major physical evidence in the case. Crime scene technician Jasmine Patel carefully documented the bag's position before opening it to reveal a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle, still containing one unfired round in the chamber. The rifle's presence at the scene immediately raised critical questions. How had it been removed from Michael Hermar's locked gun safe? Who among the family or their acquaintances knew how to operate this specific weapon? Why would someone bring the rifle to a remote location where two young girls were playing? Patel meticulously photographed and collected the weapon, applying specialized techniques to preserve potential fingerprint and DNA evidence that might identify the person who had handled the rifle. When Detectives Anderson and his partner, Detective James Wilson, returned to the Hermar home to notify the family of the discovery, they deliberately separated family members to observe their initial reactions. Sarah Hermar collapsed upon hearing the news, requiring medical attention for acute shock, while Michael fell to his knees, repeating, "No, no, not my babies," in a voice barely above a whisper. Jessica's reaction, however, struck both detectives as atypical for a child who had just learned of her sister's deaths. She remained seated on the living room sofa, her expression unchanging as she asked, "Are you sure it's them?" When Anderson confirmed the identification, Jessica nodded once and said, "I should have made them come home with me," a statement that seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous in its delivery. The mention of the rifle found at the scene prompted an immediate reaction from Michael Hermar, who rushed to check his gun safe, finding it locked but empty. Returning to the detectives, visibly shaken, he explained that the rifle was a hunting weapon he kept secured in a combination-locked safe in his home office closet. "Only Sarah and I know the combination," he insisted, though when questioned further, he acknowledged that he sometimes opened the safe when Jessica was in the room and may not have always been careful about concealing the combination. This revelation shifted the investigation's focus sharply toward the family's dynamics, with detectives now considering the possibility that the murders had been committed by someone with intimate knowledge of the Hermar household and access to secured areas within it. Following standard procedure in cases involving the deaths of children, detectives obtained a warrant to search the Hermar home, focusing on gathering evidence that might explain how the rifle had been accessed and by whom. In Jessica's bedroom, they found nothing immediately incriminating: no ammunition, no gun cleaning supplies, no obvious souvenirs from the crime that might suggest a trophy-taking mentality. What they did find, however, was a school notebook containing what appeared to be journal entries expressing resentment toward her sisters, with phrases like, "Everyone always likes N and L better," and "Mom and Dad only care about the precious princesses." These writings, while concerning, were not unusual for sibling rivalry and didn't constitute evidence of homicidal intent, but they did provide the first glimpse into Jessica's perception of her place within the family hierarchy. The most significant breakthrough in the initial phase of the investigation came when digital forensics specialist Terrence Wong began examining the family computer located in a shared space in the Hermar home. Following standard operating procedure for cases involving juvenile victims, Wong created a forensic image of the computer's hard drive to preserve all data in its original state before beginning his analysis. When he reviewed the browser history, a disturbing pattern emerged. In the week leading up to the murders, someone had conducted searches for how to load Remington 700 rifle, how much noise does a rifle make indoors, and can a 12-year-old shoot a rifle. The search times coincided with periods when, according to the family's schedule provided to police, Jessica would have been home alone while her sisters were at after-school activities and her parents were still at work. Wong expanded his search of the digital evidence, finding that the user had also researched the layout of Torrey Pines Extension Reserve, focusing on trails and secluded areas, and had visited websites discussing the audible range of gunshots in wooded areas. Most disturbing was a search from 2 days before the murders that asked, "Will people think accident if kids shoot someone?" The computer had automatically logged in under Michael Hermar's user profile, but the timing of the searches and the content specifically related to a child Jessica's age strongly suggested she was the person conducting this research. Wong immediately reported his findings to Detective Anderson, providing the first concrete evidence of premeditation and specific intent that would transform their understanding of the case from a possible accident or a crime of opportunity to a meticulously planned double homicide. As the initial 48 hours of the investigation concluded, the San Diego Police Department had established a timeline of events, collected physical evidence, including the murder weapon, and discovered digital evidence suggesting premeditation. What they still lacked was a clear motive for why a 12-year-old girl would plan and execute the murders of her younger sisters. Initial interviews with teachers, neighbors, and family friends described Jessica as quiet and somewhat withdrawn, but none reported behavior that would predict homicidal violence. The family had no history of involvement with Child Protective Services. Both parents had clean criminal records, and school counselors reported no major behavioral concerns beyond what one called typical middle child adjustment issues. The disconnect between the apparently normal family dynamic and the calculated brutality of the crime created a psychological puzzle that investigators were just beginning to piece together. On the evening of November 1st, with the evidence mounting against Jessica, Detective Anderson made the difficult decision to bring the 12-year-old in for formal questioning. Given her age, both parents were present, along with an attorney Michael Hermar had hastily retained upon realizing the direction the investigation was taking. The interrogation room at San Diego Police Headquarters was modified to appear less intimidating, with comfortable furniture and soft lighting. But nothing could disguise the gravity of the situation as Detective Anderson began to methodically present the evidence they had gathered. Jessica maintained her composure throughout the initial questioning, insisting she had simply left her sisters playing in the park, but her demeanor changed noticeably when Anderson mentioned the computer searches about the rifle. The Digital Forensics Unit's discovery of the incriminating search history marked a pivotal turning point in the investigation, shifting the focus squarely onto Jessica Hermar. Digital specialist Terrence Wong had recovered not just the searches about the rifle, but an entire pattern of inquiries that painted a disturbing picture of premeditation. The user had been methodical, Wong explained in his report, first researching the basic operation of the specific rifle model, then progressing to questions about sound, recoil management, and eventually to inquiries about legal consequences. The progression showed a mind moving systematically from conceptualization to planning to consideration of aftermath, not the impulsive actions of a child acting in momentary anger, but the calculated steps of someone determined to commit murder and potentially avoid consequences. Wong's analysis of the computer usage patterns revealed that these searches had been conducted primarily on weekday afternoons between 3:30 and 5 p.m., a time when, according to family schedules provided to police, Jessica would typically have been home alone. Nicole and Leslie participated in after-school programs, dance for Nicole, soccer for Leslie, that kept them at school until 5 p.m. 3 days a week, while Sarah Hermer worked as a marketing executive with a commute that brought her home around 5:30 p.m., and Michael Hermer, a software engineer, generally arrived home by 6 p.m. This recurring window of unsupervised time had provided Jessica with the opportunity to research her plan without fear of discovery, using the family computer in the shared home office under her father's automatically logged-in account. The content of the searches became increasingly specific and technical as the date of the murders approached. 2 weeks before the crime, the searches focused on basic information. How does a rifle work? Parts of a Remington 700, and how to load hunting rifle. By the week of the murders, the queries had evolved to include best place to shoot someone to kill instantly, can you muffle a gunshot with blankets, and how far can a gunshot be heard in woods? Most chilling was a search from the day before the murders. Can you tell if child or adult pulled trigger from fingerprints, suggesting Jessica was already considering how she might deflect responsibility if caught. When confronted with this evidence during questioning, Jessica initially claimed someone else must have used the computer, but her explanation faltered when Wong demonstrated that the search times aligned perfectly with her being home alone. The technical specificity of the searches surprised investigators as they revealed a level of deliberation unusual in juvenile offenders. In most cases involving child perpetrators, we see impulsive actions driven by immediate emotions, explained Dr. Elaine Forrester, a forensic psychologist consulting on the case. What makes this case distinct is the extended planning period and the methodical accumulation of information needed to commit the crime effectively. The searches included not just how to operate the weapon, but how to maximize lethality, minimize noise, and avoid detection, considerations that showed an understanding of both the practical aspects of committing murder and the investigative techniques that might follow. This level of calculation raised serious questions about Jessica's psychological development and her capacity for moral reasoning. Beyond the computer searches, detectives began assembling other evidence that pointed to Jessica's emerging status as the prime suspect. A review of her school assignments revealed a creative writing piece submitted 3 weeks before the murders in which the protagonist, a girl described as always in the shadow of her perfect siblings, discovered a magical object that could make people disappear. Her English teacher, initially concerned by the dark tone of the story, had discussed it with Jessica, who assured her it was just fiction inspired by fantasy books, an explanation the teacher had accepted as reasonable for a middle schooler with an active imagination. In retrospect, however, the story contained elements that paralleled Jessica's apparent feelings about her sisters and hinted at her developing plan to eliminate them from her life. Jessica's social media presence, limited by her parents to age-appropriate platforms with privacy controls, provided additional insights into her mindset leading up to the murders. Her posts, which had once featured occasional photos with her sisters at family events, had gradually shifted over the previous 6 months to exclude Nicole and Leslie entirely. Her most recent posts focused exclusively on herself, often with captions expressing sentiments like, finally doing things my way, and some people don't deserve what they have. While these posts weren't explicitly threatening, forensic psychologists noted that the progression from inclusion to exclusion of her sisters, coupled with the increasing emphasis on personal autonomy, aligned with patterns seen in adolescents experiencing pathological jealousy and developing rationalization structures for harmful actions. Interviews with school personnel began to construct a more complex picture of Jessica than the quiet, unremarkable student her parents and neighbors had described. Her seventh-grade math teacher recalled an incident 2 months before the murders when Jessica had become disproportionately angry after receiving a B+ on a test, saying, "Nicole always gets A's without even trying, and everyone makes such a big deal about it." The school counselor reported that Jessica had been referred to her after a playground altercation where she had pushed a classmate who had praised Leslie's performance at a recent swim meet, telling the girl, "No one cares about stupid swimming." These isolated incidents had been addressed as normal adolescent adjustment issues rather than warning signs of dangerous resentment, as they hadn't seemed to indicate potential for violence when viewed individually. Detective Anderson, reviewing all the accumulating evidence, recognized the need to establish a clearer picture of the family dynamics that might have contributed to Jessica's apparent resentment of her sisters. Interviews with extended family members revealed patterns that hadn't been immediately apparent. Jessica's maternal grandmother, Evelyn Martinez, described how, at family gatherings, Nicole and Leslie were often praised for their accomplishments and sociability, while Jessica, more introverted and less demonstrative, received less attention. Michael and Sarah didn't mean to create any imbalance, Martinez explained, but Nicole and Leslie were more outgoing, more visibly talented in ways that drew attention. Jessica was quieter, harder to read. This pattern of differential social reinforcement, while not unusual in families with multiple children, appeared to have had a profound impact on Jessica's self-perception and her view of her place within the family. The investigation took a significant turn when detectives interviewed Jessica's former babysitter, 20-year-old Olivia Fan, who had regularly cared for the Hermar children before leaving for college the previous year. Fan described incidents that, in hindsight, suggested Jessica's resentment toward her sisters had been developing for some time, Jessica removing Nicole's artwork from the refrigerator and hiding it, deliberately breaking a trophy Leslie had received for swimming, and once telling Fan, "Everyone would be happier if it was just me." Fan had mentioned these behaviors to Sarah Hermar, who had arranged for Jessica to begin seeing a therapist for what was described as adjustment to changes at home, referring to the increasing independence and achievements of her younger sisters. The therapy, however, had been discontinued after 3 months when Jessica refused to participate, telling her parents the therapist was stupid and doesn't understand anything. As the evidence mounted, Detective Anderson scheduled a formal interview with Jessica's therapist, Dr. Rachel Goldman, who initially expressed reluctance to discuss a minor patient, but cooperated after being served with a court order related to the homicide investigation. Dr. Goldman revealed that during their sessions, Jessica had expressed feelings of being invisible in her own home, describing how her parents attended every one of Nicole's art shows and Leslie's swim meets, but had missed Jessica's science fair because it conflicted with Leslie's soccer tournament. She told me they wouldn't notice if I disappeared, but they'd notice if precious Nicole or Leslie even got a paper cut, Goldman recalled. These therapy sessions had concluded 6 months before the murders, when Jessica had simply stopped engaging, responding to questions with one-word answers, until her parents decided to discontinue the treatment. The most damning evidence emerged when detectives obtained Jessica's personal journal through a supplemental search warrant, finding entries that explicitly detailed her growing hatred for her sisters and her desire to eliminate them from her life. An entry dated 2 months before the murders read, "I watched Dad teaching N and L how to use his telescope tonight. He never shows me anything cool like that. I asked if I could look too, and he said, 'In a minute.' But that minute never came because precious L saw Saturn's rings, and everyone was so amazed. Sometimes I think about if they just weren't here anymore, and it was just me. Mom and Dad would have to pay attention to me then." The journal contained no explicit murder plan, but the progression of entries showed Jessica's fantasy of being an only child evolving from a vague wish to a fixation she revisited repeatedly, with the journal entries corroborating the digital evidence, physical evidence from the crime scene, and witness statements about Jessica's history of resentment toward her sisters. Detective Anderson believed they had established sufficient probable cause to treat the 12-year-old as the prime suspect in her sister's murders. The decision to pursue charges against a child so young was not taken lightly, involving consultations with the district attorney's office, juvenile justice specialists, and forensic psychologists to assess both the strength of the evidence and Jessica's capacity to understand the nature and consequences of her actions. The legal standard for charging a juvenile as young as 12 with murder required not only evidence of the act itself, but also demonstration of the child's ability to form specific intent and understand the permanence and wrongfulness of causing death. On the morning of November 3rd, 4 days after the murders, Detective Anderson and a female officer from the Juvenile Division arrived at the Hermar home with a warrant for Jessica's arrest. Michael and Sarah Hermar, who had been staying with relatives since the discovery of their daughter's bodies, were notified of the impending arrest and arrived at the house just as the officers were explaining the situation to Jessica. The scene that unfolded in the living room of the once happy family home represented the complete shattering of what remained of the Hermar family. Parents forced to witness their only surviving child being taken into custody for the murders of their other children. Sarah Hermar attempted to embrace Jessica before she was led away, but the girl turned from her mother's outstretched arms, saying only, "You'll visit me, right?" A question that hung in the air as the officers escorted her to the waiting police vehicle. As news of Jessica's arrest spread through the community and eventually gained national attention, public reaction ranged from shock and disbelief to grim fascination with the case of the San Diego sister killer, as some media outlets had begun to call her. Legal experts appeared on television debating whether a 12-year-old could or should be held fully accountable for such a calculated crime, while psychologists discussed the potential factors that might lead a child to develop such deadly jealousy toward her siblings. At the center of this storm of public opinion and professional analysis, Jessica Hermar was processed into the San Diego County Juvenile Detention Facility, where she would await a fitness hearing to determine whether she would be tried as a juvenile or, in an exceptional legal move, as an adult for the premeditated murders of Nicole and Leslie Hermar. The task of building a comprehensive case against 12-year-old Jessica Hermar fell primarily to Assistant District Attorney Emma Baker, a veteran prosecutor with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, who specialized in cases involving juvenile offenders and violent crimes. Baker assembled a team that included forensic experts, digital analysts, psychologists, and investigators to examine every aspect of the evidence against Jessica, knowing that prosecuting a child this young for premeditated murder would face intense scrutiny from both the legal community and the public. "We need this case to be airtight," Baker told her team during their first strategy meeting. Not just because of the defendant's age, but because these victims deserve nothing less than absolute justice. The foundation of that case would be the computer search history that had first revealed Jessica's methodical planning. Digital forensic specialist Terrence Wong expanded his analysis of the family computer, recovering not only the browser history that showed Jessica's research into rifles and shooting, but also deleted files that further incriminated her. Using specialized recovery software, Wong discovered that Jessica had downloaded and later deleted a PDF manual for her father's Remington 700 rifle, saving it temporarily to a folder